Hello, one and hello, all. My name is Maponga J, live broadcasting from Zimbabwe. Um, what a time, what a time. Greetings to all of you on the face of the continent. We are here on your channel. We were discussing African politics, science, medicine, economics, and politics, and everything else between. The whole idea is to get the African people talking about their African problems and seeking for African solutions. I would want to just give a small little background to my reason for being in Zimbabwe. I came into the country 2 years ago, back into the country 2 years ago, having spent a few years away from this country, around the world and traveling. The reason for my coming back was very solid and simple: to create the positive narrative around the Zimbabwean political and economic space. Having lived outside of this country for so many years, I got to understand the amount of impact that negative media had on the perception of the Western world to the Zimbabwean economy and Africa in particular. And this political conversation has not been a true narrative because it is a Western narrative which seeks to manage African politics, in that the African must never be in power of his resources, his economy, his politics, and ultimately determine and decide his destiny. The colonial system is built in such a way that the African economies must constantly depend on donor money and grants from the West. And these grants from the West are coming at a cost of political management. And the local politicians, in their premature conversation, they fall victim to this narrative that says you can't do it by yourself, you need us to drive you. And the Zimbabwean story is an African story which says we can make it on our own. Zimbabwe became key to me strategically because then you begin to disrupt the narrative and say that even if you don't support us, we can do it on our own. The closures of business in Zimbabwe, the closure of the banks, the collapse of the insurance companies, and the packing away of the bags of the colonial systems to go back to put Zimbabwe into depression and work to that favor that says you can put African leaders in power and they will not make it. This narrative, it is conducive to the West because it, one, shows that the African leader is incapable and the African people are incapable of ruling themselves. Secondly, they are incapable of running an effective business environment. And thirdly, the incarceration of Zimbabwe into sanctions then develops the story that says to the rest of Africa, should you try to do what Zimbabwe did, this is what we will do to you also. So you'll hear other countries like Zimbabwe, South Africa, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Botswana, Lesotho, and other countries in the world saying, your country, if you do this, you'll be another Zimbabwe. But being Zimbabwean means therefore that we own your land, which is the means of production, means of mining, means of agriculture, housing, roads. And owning that economy then speaks to the people of that country being able to determine the direction in which they want their economy to go, which is not favorable to the narrative of the colonial system, which is deliberately built around you need to depend on us. So Zimbabwe is being used as a case study that should any other country that is being ruled by the French, of course, as a satellite government or countries that are being run by Germany, or countries that are being run by Portugal, countries that are being run by Britain, and countries that are being run by America as surrogates government. You don't dare take away the land from the colonial system. And if you do that, this is what we will do to you. Therefore, the narrative of Zimbabwe plays itself into the African conversation and the global narrative that says, as long as you have political power, don't even try to have economic power. And this becomes very destructive because then politics is playing into the hand of economics. And the people who are running the economy of those countries will ultimately have power over the politics of those countries. I therefore came back into the country and I said to myself, I need to look into how do we transform and change this narrative. Successful here and there, but I'm happy and excited to note that I am responsible for creating that positive image of the country. It is my business to make sure that the external market, the international market, the economic market looks into the stories that are not being told on mainstream media that speak to the deliberate progress that the country is doing towards developing itself. This, for me, it is a game changer because it allows the international community to look into the sanctioned country with a different lens. The roads that are being developed, the bridges that are being built, the hospitals that are being built, the universities that are being built, the dams that are being built, the airports that are being built, the roads and infrastructure development programs that are running, NDS1, National Development Strategy, and all what the government has promised its people. I want to follow up on those programs and see and verify if what the government said is what the government is doing. At the end of the day, it's not about who is in power, it's who is working to transform and change the environment. And when I came back into the country, many people felt it was worthwhile for me to join an opposition party. In that case, it was MDC, before it disintegrated into 3, 4 other parties, and CCC came into the space. And many people thought that I would come in with a mainstream narrative of joining opposition. But it's not about joining opposition. It's about joining progress. Joining progress. Because I don't care who is in power. All I care about is, are the people getting the services that they need? And when I walked back and I found that the present government was vigorously involved in developing the country in various ways without the help of the external funders. Having the IMF and World Bank freezing their donor and grant money into Zimbabwe, it only meant that all the developments that we are seeing in the country are being fully sponsored by the government itself through the tax money and other means of resource sale and resale and playing into the space of business. It is true that during this moment of sanctions, Zimbabwe has been able to produce more millionaires than it ever did during the times of freedom in the Mugabe era. Because when the international businesses closed down, the local community stepped in to fill in those gaps and supply the needs that the market needed so badly. This range of products and services now remained in the hands of the local people to drive their own economy. And it was an exciting moment for me, to say the least, to begin to see a people taking their future into their hands and championing their path. Therefore, Zimbabwe is not just Zimbabwe as a country. Zimbabwe is a representation of Africa as a continent, that the challenges that Zimbabwe is facing at a national level, these are the challenges that Africa is facing at a continental level. And should all Africa take the Zimbabwe route, then we would want to see how Europe and America would treat Africa. Will the European market and American market put the whole of Africa on sanctions? And if you put Africa on sanctions, the question is, where are you going to get your raw materials? So Africa has not been able to understand and know the power of her resources as they play themselves into the world economic system. Because should we understand and grasp the amount of power that we have, and that power is not power as of a country, it is power as of a continent, we will be able to upset the dinner table of the colonial system, which does not work well into the narrative of the West, because they will want to remain in power as long as we are divided. So in our division, they make profit. In our unity, they lose power. The coming into Zimbabwe, therefore, for me was critical to correct that narrative, to say a different story. Africans can do it. Africans are doing it. Africans will be able to take their destiny in their hands, cut down their losses, focus on their resources, create new partnerships, whether it is East and wherever or Middle East, and create an economy that will work for them. The educational system that we are coming from, which had produced us as workers, we said, no, no more workers. We are now talking employers. No more employment. We are now talking ownership. No more, just being a servant. We are now talking stakeholder management, where people in the country, now that we have land in the hands of our people, then the people must now start to study and say what resources are on this land, and then convert those resources into industries, into factories, into jobs, and the community remains as a shareholder in that development. And that narrative is what we are trying to share with Africa, particularly with the politicians, to say you can never say you are in power, but you are not in control. You can never say you are in charge, but yet you cannot decide. You can never say you are a president, yet you are never presiding over the affairs of your own country. Political parties would want power to get into parliament, but you're sitting in parliament running and managing a process that doesn't belong to you, running and managing laws that don't belong to you, managing and running banks that don't belong to you, managing and running education systems that don't belong to you, managing and running health systems that don't belong to you. Then the question is, why are you there? And what is the purpose of government if government's function is simply management of the colonial system? And many of my young people out there, you may want to revisit this video and watch it again slowly so that you can get into my mind space to understand that there is no need to cry for political power when that political power does not come with economic power and economic muscle. And economic muscle will not survive, will not thrive, will not be tolerated as long as it challenges the colonial system. Because the entire system is banked on colonial, neo-colonial management systems and structures. And then you will always run in circles, thinking that by changing politicians we're going somewhere, when in fact you can change as many politicians as you want until you change and transform the policies and the constitutions, which then speak to land, who must own land, speak to mining, who must own a mine, who can hold a diamond and trade it, speak to banking, who must own a bank and how do you open a bank, speak to insurance, how do you own an insurance company and how do you manage it, speak to all these structures and policies that the government seems to be the custodian of this quote-unquote rule of law. The question is, whose law is it? And if you are supposed to be a custodian of law, which is a Roman Dutch law, do you have Roman and Dutch people that you must be managing? And this conversation must continue. So I came back into the country and I said, no, we need to showcase the, the resilience of the Africans. We need to showcase the strength of the Africans. We need to showcase the positive narrative story of Zimbabwe. That after 30, 40 years of negotiating with white people, and white people have not been truthful in terms of their policies. They agreed to one thing, they cut it off. We are going to pay, then they refused to pay. And Mugabe worked for the longest of time, working with the trust of the Europeans, working with the trust of the British and the Americans, who had agreed in the longest agreement that they would pay for the land which they had used for the retirement packages of their army generals during World War II and etc. And we will pay for their retirement. We will pay for land. We'll give you the money, and then you take the money and pay the white farm owners. And that word owners must be put in quotes, because now as a Zimbabwe, we're supposed to be paying for the land, paying the white people for the land which they are supposed to own. But we know that for them to own the land, they stole it from us. They killed us for that land. They usurped us of land and cattle. And they abused the land, put fertilizers and chemicals and etc. Now we're taking back the land, but the land is no longer in the condition in which it was when they took it from us. So even that money on its own is not enough to pay for the damages that are done to the land. The minerals that have been taken out here are not coming back into the land. The poisoned land we are now inheriting is not coming back to us in a restored fashion. So we needed to start looking at this concept of foreign funds and sovereign funds, that after you've destroyed someone's land, is there a way maybe of rehabilitating these mines and etc. and giving back the land to the people in the condition in which you took the land? And worse still, even when that money was going to be coming into Zimbabwe, it's not like it was going to be going into the hands of the local people. That money was supposed to come and then go back in the hands of the white people, and the white people will take the money and go back to their countries and leave us with an empty shell, leave us with an empty, dry ground on which the African must start their own economy and go forward. It is true, therefore, that the colonial system has never loved us. It will never love us. And maybe they have a right, because they have their countries to build. The question is for you as Africans, do you have a continent to build? So we need to start looking at these issues more objectively and develop a new breed of politicians, new breed of economic champions, new breed of religious leaders, new breed of academic and educational expertise and experts who can walk back into this program and say, how do we transform the system so that it can be favorable towards the African? And coming back into the country, then I said to myself, no, look into the positive things that are happening. And because this controls perception in the international space as to what is it that is happening in that country. Is it positive? Is it negative? And the coming of Mayweather, Moneyman, the coming of Branson in the same week into Zimbabwe, just last week, with one billionaire from Europe, one billionaire from the West, interesting enough, one white, one black in the country, same week. One is an aviation guru, the other one is a sports guru. We needed maybe to look and see that this is a positive image that says to the country, people are welcome here. That says to the international market, you can come into the country and we will not eat you up and we will not destroy you, and allow you as a visitor to make your own assessment and judgment as to what the country has in store for you. Lots of negative people are always out there criticizing this is that, $200, $500,000, this money should have been used for this and that. Man, but you don't have control other people's money. People will do what they want to do with their money, but at a positive image. The international market needs to look into Zimbabwe with a different view, and they would rather come and become partners when we still need partnership. But the way things are going right now, it looks like Zimbabwe will become sustainable without external help. And that is the story that I want to share with Zimbabwe. That's a story I want to share with Africa. Even as we are approaching elections right here in Zimbabwe, vote for whoever you want to vote for. But remember, in the midst of voting, do not vote away your independence. Don't vote away your power. Don't vote away your economy. Don't vote dependency. Vote for independence. Vote for progress rather than retrogressive habits. Vote for ownership of your resources, ownership of your economy, rather than voting for servanthood and slavery into the same colonial system. So we don't need white people to come back into Africa. They can come as visitors, they can come as investors, they can come as tourists. Fine. But we will not be able to tolerate colonial people coming here to make Zimbabwe a colony again. In the words of Robert Mugabe, Zimbabwe will never be a colony again. It will not happen. It will not happen. The day that happens, I will go back to war myself. I will go back to war myself. Because there's no way in 1,000 years later that the colonial masters can stand on this land and declare this land as their land when the local people who own this land are still alive and we are still recovering from the effects and the punishment of colonialism. So it is true, therefore, that until and unless we as Zimbabweans begin to speak positively about our country, we as Africans begin to speak positively about our continent, the colonial system will constantly thrive on the negative narrative. And the negative narrative is intended for regime change. See, they are failing. See, they are failing. So we need to get better people who can run the system. Then they come amongst us. No, you are better than them. You are not like these ones. Come, we'll give you some money. Now get into power. You get into power, and you just discover you are not in power. You are in management. You are a stooge. You are a surrogate government, a shadow government that is managing and protecting the same colonial system. So African politicians and African young people, we need to start thinking, and not just think, but think outside of the box and say, why are we here? What must we do? And how do we take full ownership over our economies and have the politics that speaks to self-determination, that speaks to sovereignty, that speaks to independence, that speaks to power, that speaks to control, so that the African can sit down like the Japanese, like the Chinese, like the Americans, like the British, and say, this is our continent, this is our country, these are our resources. We own both the means of production and the production itself, and will determine where, how, what, who we want to get in touch with in terms of driving that narrative. So I'm excited to be in Zimbabwe at this particular time and become part of the voice of reason, the voice of reason. There could be 1,000 things happening wrong out there, but man, there are 10,000 good things that are happening right here on the continent of Africa. It is your responsibility as an African to write and speak that positive African story, Zimbabwean story, family story, personal story, because branding is everything. Branding controls perception. How do you want to be viewed? How do you want your family to be viewed? How do you want your tribe to be viewed? How do you want your country to be viewed? How do you want your continent to be viewed? I am here simply to tell you that without the colonial system, Africa is a possibility towards the United Kingdoms of Africa, towards the United States of Africa, towards the United Front of Africa, towards the unification of Africa. One army, one government, one economy, one educational system, technological hubs, and all that goes with it. No need for passports on the African continent because we are here as one country. Africa is one country, separated by many rivers. With those few words, I thank you. Say something positive about yourself. Even if your mother is a witch, you will not put it on Facebook and on Twitter like a chicken. Pick the seeds and leave the soil.